I cannot retire because I have 2 new faces on layaway. For those of you that don't know, I was banned from the Tonight Show for 28 years because I had left Carson to do my own show, and a woman in those days didn't leave. It was a whole... trust me.
Yes.
A man could leave. Cosby left, come back, we love you.
Yes.
I left, you'll never be on again. Men get so nervous. Men hit the age of 50, the balls hit the ground, you can play golf. Yes. You take a man of 65, you put him on the toilet, it looks like he's making a cup of tea. Yes, I'm telling you.
Well, we don't have the, we just, and you do, I mean, you really find me more and totally alone. Mm-hmm. And in the privacy of your bedroom. You know, that's the privacy of your house.
Yeah.
On a September morning in 2014, at a hospital in Manhattan, Joan Rivers quietly drew her last breath at the age of 81. The woman who had made all of America laugh with her razor-sharp wit had passed away, closing a life that had almost never known rest. The news left the entertainment world in shock. Presidents issued statements of mourning. Comedians broke down crying on live television, and generations of women bowed their heads before the one who had paved the way for them. What was especially heartbreaking was that in Joan's New York apartment, her work calendar was still completely full of upcoming shows, flights, recording sessions, and thousands of audience members still waiting for her to appear. To the public, Joan Rivers was the woman who made all of America laugh sharp, bold, and afraid of no one. But behind that spotlight was a life full of scars. She had been threatened by her father with commitment to a mental institution, been turned away by the entire entertainment industry, and endured the devastating loss of her beloved husband. In today's video, I will tell the story of Joan Rivers' life from the little girl in Brooklyn who desperately craved recognition to the queen of comedy, standing at the peak of fame and then being swept up in unforeseen tragedies. Before we begin, here's a short note for you. The entire story you are about to hear is built on authentic materials, from the subject's own autobiographies, accounts from her daughter, Melissa court documents, and official medical reports. We respect the truth, and we will uncover the most private pains hidden behind one of the most famous smiles in America. If you're ready, pour yourself a cup of coffee and find a really comfortable seat. We will take our time and slowly enter the story of a woman who spent her entire life making the world laugh while hiding countless tears behind the scenes. Joan Alexandra Malinsky cried her first cry on June 8, 1933, in Brooklyn, New York. She was born into a middle-class Jewish family, an environment that appeared peaceful on the surface, but actually hid undercurrents of discontent. Her father, Dr. Meyer Malinsky, was the son of Russian Jewish immigrants who had fled to America. Carrying memories of poverty and insecurity from his refugee past, Meyer was an extremely strict man. He wanted his daughters to walk the safest, most stable paths with no room for risks or unrealistic dreams. Meanwhile, her mother Beatrice had a completely opposite soul. Beatrice always longed for an upper-class, glamorous life filled with expensive dresses and glittering parties in Manhattan. The gap between the wife's dreams and the modest income of a junior doctor turned the Malinsky household into a miniature battlefield. Heated arguments about money and bills happened regularly, creating a stifling and extremely heavy atmosphere at home. In the midst of that fractured family picture, little Joan grew up with a very clear awareness of her place. She was not a child born with a silver spoon, nor did she possess the dazzling beauty of her biological sister Barbara. In her later books, Joan always described herself in her youth as a short, chubby little girl with very ordinary looks. Under a photo taken when she was 13, in the book Enter Talking, Joan herself wrote a heartbreaking caption, "The 13-year-old fat pig, wishing she could teach her arms and hips to inhale and hold their breath." The only thing she had to defend herself in that house was her incredibly sharp tongue and a keenly observant mind that made the adults around her uneasy. However, in the context of American society in the 1940s, that sharpness was not considered a gift. For a Jewish girl, having a mouth that was too quick, sarcastic, or argumentative was seen as a major flaw. Society at that time only expected girls to bow their heads, smile gently, and obey. Raised under such pressure, Joan was steered by her family toward a proper academic path. She attended the prestigious private school, Adelphi, then transferred to Connecticut College, and finally ended up at Barnard College. In 1954, she graduated with a double degree in English and anthropology. With diploma in hand, everyone around her, especially her parents, was convinced that Joan's life script had already been written. Her family expected her to take a comfortable desk job for a short time, then find a suitable husband from a good family, get married, and have children. They hoped she would quietly disappear into the safe shell of middle-class suburban life, repeating the lives of millions of American women at that time. Joan even tried to compromise. Right after graduation, she entered her first marriage with a man named James Sanger. But that marriage was short and suffocating. It was annulled after just 6 months when James firmly refused to have children. For Joan, that quick failed marriage was like a small stain, a failed compromise that she rarely mentioned for the rest of her life. After escaping the arranged marriage, Joan made a decision that shook the entire Molinsky household. She announced that she would not get married again and would instead pursue a career in the arts to become an actress. This decision caused an earthquake. The first blow came when her father, Dr. Meyer, became so furious that he lost control. He not only withdrew financial support, but also threatened to sign papers to commit his own daughter to a mental institution simply because she dared to dream of becoming an artist. To him, a normal Jewish girl wanting to be an artist was insane and had to be stopped. Leaving the house full of arguments, disappointment, and threats, Joan stepped out onto the streets of New York with fierce determination, but carrying many wounds. The price of her dream had begun to be paid early through her family's rejection, and the cold doors of show business awaited her with even harsher trials. Entering the 1950s, Joan had almost nothing, no money, no family backing, and no connections in the entertainment industry. For many years afterward, she lived as a struggling comedian. Joan knocked on hundreds of casting offices, but all she received were cold shakes of the head. To survive in the most expensive city in the world, she had to take on all kinds of odd jobs. In the early mornings, people saw her rushing around as an office worker doing public relations for small stores, and even working as a fashion coordinator at the Lord & Taylor chain. But when night fell, Joan would wander to the dingy underground clubs in Greenwich Village. Those were stifling, dimly lit cafes thick with the smell of cigarette smoke and cheap beer. Under the pale yellow lights, she stepped onto rickety stages under the stage name Pepper January. The audience usually consisted of only a few scattered drunk patrons, and sometimes no one even bothered to look up at the girl trying to tell jokes on stage. Nevertheless, Joan persisted, testing every line and every bit of material, despite the crowd's indifference. What damaged Joan's self-esteem the most during these years was not poverty, but the insulting comments about her as a person. Managers and bookers repeatedly rejected her with incredibly cruel reasons. They criticized her for looking too Jewish, but having a style that was not Jewish enough for stereotypical roles. They looked her straight in the face and advised her to get plastic surgery to change her face, or at least change her name to something less provincial sounding. Enduring immense pressure from an industry that judged women by their appearance, she finally gave up the name Malinsky and changed her stage name to Joan Rivers, a name borrowed from Tony Rivers, one of the few agents who was willing to talk to her at the time. In the 1960s, becoming a female stand-up comedian was an extremely lonely experience. The stand-up comedy world at that time was an exclusive club for men only. Women on stage were only expected to wear pretty dresses, sing sad love songs, or serve as props for male comedians. A woman daring to hold the microphone stand alone and expose the dark sides of life, complain about being single, or satirize society was considered offensive. Despite being isolated, Joan never stopped learning. She hung around the clubs, quietly standing backstage to watch names like Lenny Bruce, Woody Allen, and George Carlin perform. From them, Joan learned how to command the stage, then combined those techniques with the perspective of a woman pushed to the margins of society. Gradually, she forged her sharpest weapon words. After years of struggle, she began to achieve her first small successes. These were minor supporting roles in summer stock theater, in the suburbs, or longer gigs at second-tier clubs. Those nameless stages helped her refine her distinctive comedic voice, rapid-fire delivery, self-deprecating humor, and no forbidden topics. But the price of those youthful years was isolation, poverty, and self-confidence worn down to the bone. There were many nights when Joan returned to her cramped apartment, lay staring at the cracked ceiling, and cried until she was exhausted. She cried from the feeling of failure, from the fear that her parents had been right, and from the bitter belief that she would never be good enough, pretty enough, or graceful enough for the world to accept her. After hundreds of failures and countless forgotten performances, a fateful door suddenly opened on February 2nd, 1965, turning Joan Rivers' life onto a glorious new path. That day, Joan Rivers knew very clearly that this was her last chance. If she failed that night, she would have to give up the stage forever and return to being an anonymous office worker. But when the lights came on, all her trembling disappeared. Joan stepped onto the stage and began to speak. The room exploded. The audience roared with laughter at a woman who dared to mock her own appearance, her single status, and the despair of girls who didn't fit conventional beauty standards. In an era when women on television were only allowed to be gentle, Joan's bluntness was like a slap in the face to outdated molds. And it wasn't just the studio audience who were conquered. Behind his familiar desk, Johnny Carson, the undisputed king of late-night American television, laughed so hard he kept wiping away tears. When the performance ended, he looked at Joan and said the words that would change her life forever. "You're going to be a star."
And I said, you know, you're going to be a big star.
I remember
And that's
that.
something you don't say because it always sounds like, you know, you're just...
And I looked behind me. I couldn't believe you were talking to me.
Yeah. And here you are.
That statement was not just a compliment. Coming from Johnny Carson, it was a coronation. It carried the power of law in the entertainment world. After just one night, Joan Rivers went from being a nobody rejected by clubs to officially stepping into the ranks of America's brightest comedy stars. She quickly became a regular guest on the couch of The Tonight Show. Over time, her status was further solidified. Carson trusted her so much that he gave her the position of permanent guest host, the regular substitute host, whenever he was absent.
Sorry to hear that, because I always like to think a really great-looking guy is stupid, you know? No, it cheers you up. Then they don't dance with you, who cares? He's dumb, you
That's
know?
right, he's dumb.
Strong silence just means dumb.
Why don't we call restaurants and see what, because this is California and celebrities eat out.
Good idea.
Okay,
Good idea.
let's go. You know, Heidi Abramowitz, that was, she just answered. Let's call Spago.
Good idea.
Okay? Because we were always in Spago.
Joan's laughter conquered millions of viewers from coast to coast. She officially ushered in a completely new era for female comedians. She broke gender barriers successfully, building a cool, uncompromising image that dared to speak raw truths that women of that time only dared to whisper in private. Joan's life changed dramatically. From nights counting every penny to pay rent, she now traveled by limousine, wore expensive designer clothes, and owned luxurious apartments. The recognition from the entertainment industry, something she had craved throughout her youth, was finally firmly in her grasp. However, the stage lights and applause had never been enough to erase the wounds from her childhood. The more successful she became, the more internal insecurity haunted her. She was always afraid that this fame was just a fragile dream, that at any moment everything could be taken away, pushing her back to the days of poverty and humiliation. To fight that fear, Joan turned herself into a non-stop working machine. She carefully kept tens of thousands of jokes in index card files and constantly reinvented herself, driven by one single obsession: the fear that the audience would get bored with her. And the root of that insecurity also came from another invisible bond named Johnny Carson. To Joan, Carson was not only her career mentor, but also like a spiritual father. His recognition became the balm that soothed the wounds left by her biological father, Meyer Malinsky, when he rejected her dreams. But that very attachment also became a shackle. Joan stood at the peak, yet she still lived in Carson's enormous shadow. She understood a harsh truth: Carson had opened the door to her career, and he also had the power to destroy it. That fear proved entirely justified when 1986 arrived. At this point, Joan was at the height of her dazzling success. She was the #1 substitute host of The Tonight Show, bringing in huge ratings whenever she appeared. Yet in the calculating world of entertainment, her position was actually just a castle built on sand. NBC was secretly making a list of potential successors to Johnny Carson when he retired. And the bitter truth was that Joan Rivers' name was not on it. The network executives only saw her as a temporary stand-in. They had never believed that a woman had what it took to officially helm the primetime slot of American television. Just as Joan realized, the limits the entertainment industry placed on her Fox network appeared. This rising network made a bold offer to give her her own late-night show, going head-to-head with Carson, called The Late Show starring Joan Rivers. They not only offered her a $10 million contract, but also gave her absolute power to decide the content. Fox's offer felt like a lifeline for the burning desire for independence that had long smoldered inside Joan. Her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, who was also her manager, urged her to seize this opportunity. He understood that if she didn't stand on her own 2 feet, Joan would forever remain in Johnny Carson's shadow. After many sleepless nights, torn between loyalty and the ambition for freedom, Joan decided to sign the contract. But she had no idea that this decision would lead to one of the most painful breakdowns of her life. Before she had a chance to speak directly with Carson, news of the contract leaked to the press. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, she hurriedly called her mentor to explain. That phone call was very short. As soon as Joan said, "Johnny, I want you to know that," the other end clicked coldly. Carson had hung up. Undeterred, Joan tried calling again. This time, there was still no goodbye, no anger, no questioning. Only the cold sound of the phone being hung up again. That was the last sound Joan Rivers ever heard from Johnny Carson. From two people who had once been close on screen, they never spoke another word to each other until Carson passed away. Johnny Carson's anger did not stop at silence. With his enormous power in television, he almost completely shut Joan out of the system. She was banned from The Tonight Show and NBC programs. Fearing they would upset Carson, many other networks and big stars gradually turned their backs on her. Later she shared this in an interview with Mark Allen. "NBC went to work to destroy me." From a trusted and beloved protege, Joan suddenly became seen as a traitor and an ungrateful person in the eyes of the public and the industry. The press constantly dug into her decision, using harsh words to dissect and condemn her. But the tragedy did not end there. The Late Show on Fox quickly fell into crisis. Due to Hollywood's silent boycott, the show struggled to book A-list guests. At the same time, intense conflicts between her husband Edgar Rosenberg and Fox executives pushed everything to the brink of collapse. Just 8 months after going on air, Fox decided to fire Edgar. When Joan firmly stood by her husband, the network did not hesitate to fire her as well. Everything fell apart faster than anyone could believe. Joan lost her show, lost the mentor who had once lifted her up, and her reputation was crushed by a wave of bitter criticism. Many called her a blindly ambitious woman, while in reality, her decision to leave Carson stemmed only from the desire to be recognized, to stand on her own, and to prove that a woman also had the right to command her own stage. And when her career had not yet had time to recover, an even greater tragedy struck. This time, it did not just hit her reputation or work, it tore straight into her family. In 1987, her husband of 22 years, Edgar Rosenberg, fell into a severe crisis. To Joan, Edgar was not just a husband. He was also her manager, her guide, and the protective wall shielding her from the storms of the entertainment industry. Therefore, being fired by Fox was not merely a professional failure. It shattered Edgar's self-worth, honor, and sense of existence. Trapped by illness, depression, and guilt for believing he had contributed to his wife's career collapse, Edgar gradually could no longer bear the pressure. In mid-August 1987, Edgar flew to a hotel in Philadelphia. In the quiet room, he took a large amount of the sedative Valium and ended his life. When she received the call from the police, Joan's world stopped spinning. The pain of that loss was too great beyond the boundaries of words. She had not only lost her life partner, but also her strongest support. Edgar's funeral took place under the prying eyes of the media and the cold indifference of those who had once been friends in show business. However, the pain of a widow was not the end of it. Edgar left behind enormous debts and a mess of financial troubles. Joan had to single-handedly shoulder the task of rebuilding her career from zero, while facing the psychological collapse of her only daughter, Melissa. At that time, Melissa was just a teenager. Facing her father's sudden death, along with the terrible pressure from the media, she fell into deep trauma. In her despair and disorientation, Melissa poured all her anger onto her mother. She blamed the harsh showbiz environment and blamed Joan's ambition for indirectly causing the tragedy. For a long period, Melissa completely cut off contact, stopped speaking to her, and rejected all of her mother's care. Living in a large, cold house, Joan was surrounded by countless pains: a ruined career, mounting debts, the loss of her husband, and the hateful eyes of her only child. Depression came as an inevitability. The guilt of a mother and a wife consumed her mind. There were moments when Joan sat in her bedroom holding a gun and bottles of sleeping pills, seriously considering following Edgar to end the dark days. But right in that moment, close to death, her little Yorkie dog jumped onto the bed and curled up in her arms. That small but deeply instinctive moment awakened Joan's fierce will to live. She realized that if she died, there would be no one left in this world to take care of Melissa, and those who had trampled on her family would win. Joan decided to stand up. Swallowing her tears and the pride of a star who had once earned millions of dollars, she accepted returning to the starting point. Joan took performances wherever she could earn money, worked herself to exhaustion to pay off debts, and proved to her daughter that their family would never surrender to fate. From the depths of despair, a stronger, tougher Joan Rivers gradually emerged. She began writing, turning her own pain into material for self-mockery. Her books landed on bestseller lists, bringing Joan's name back to the public in a different way. But for Joan, just coming back was not enough. She understood that to survive in an ever-changing entertainment industry, she had to keep reinventing herself. So while many people her age chose to rest, Joan continued to find herself a new stage. This time, the stage was no longer small comedy clubs or guest spots on late-night television. Joan stepped into the red carpet world, where Hollywood's glamour dresses and fame were exposed to millions of viewers. In the early 2000s, Joan became the soul of the show Fashion Police on E! She turned red carpets at award ceremonies into a sharp comedy stage where Hollywood's glamorous dresses could become the subject of satire with just one sentence. With the microphone in hand, Joan asked the classic question, "Who are you wearing?" From then on, her straightforward, edgy, yet highly personal comments about red carpet fashion quickly became a cultural phenomenon.
Well, right. It's true. You know, this is named appropriately. It's like, who are you wearing?
Who are you wearing? That was Joan's signature phrase on the red carpet, if you remember. So, who are you wearing? You're wearing Joan Rivers.
Joan was not afraid of offending even the most powerful stars in Hollywood. After all the losses, betrayals, and tragedies she had endured public criticism, no longer had the power to make her falter. She worked with an energy that astonished many young artists. Joan continuously published bestsellers, performed sold-out stand-up shows around the world, and appeared on many television programs. Audiences saw a woman past 70, then 80, with bright blonde hair and a face carefully maintained after many plastic surgeries, still standing on stage for hours to make people laugh. After everything, Joan Rivers did not just come back. She rebuilt an entire empire for herself. However, behind the roaring laughter and glittering lights on the red carpet, Joan Rivers still carried wounds that had never healed. The silence from Johnny Carson, the mentor she had once respected like a father, still smoldered in her heart for many years. Even when Carson passed away, the fact that he left without a word of forgiveness meant that pain never had a chance to close. Besides that, Edgar's death in that hotel room years ago remained a haunting memory for Joan every night. After all those losses, laughter for her was not only a way to fight life, but also armor to hide the weakness and guilt that had never disappeared. On stage, she often turned her own death into a joke. Joan once spoke about her dream funeral in a mocking tone. "I want my funeral to be a grand, red carpet event with lights, cameras, and action. I want Meryl Streep to cry in 5 different voices. I want a giant fan blowing my hair even when I'm lying in the coffin."
When I die, and yes, Melissa, the day will come, and yes, Melissa, everything's still in your name. I want my funeral to be a huge showbiz affair with lights and cameras and action. I want craft services, I want paparazzi, I want publicists making a scene. I want it to be Hollywood all the way. Don't give me some rabbi rambling on. I want Meryl Streep crying in 5 different accents.
The audience laughed at those jokes, but few understood the psychological mechanism behind them. For a woman who was always afraid of being forgotten and afraid of losing control over her life, like Joan, turning death into comedy was the only way she could face it. She mocked death before death could come for her. It was a defiant smile, but one also filled with deep sorrow. Joy and sadness in Joan Rivers' final years always intertwined cruelly. She laughed so she wouldn't have to cry, worked non-stop so painful memories wouldn't catch up. Joan stood firm on her scarred legs, believing that the most brutal storms were behind her. But life always has scripts no one can foresee. In 2014, when Joan's career was still strong, a medical appointment changed everything. On August 28th, Joan left her apartment looking as put together as always and went to Yorkville Endoscopy in Manhattan. At 81, she still maintained a packed work schedule, but her voice had begun to sound hoarse and weak. To check on her acid reflux and vocal cords, Joan decided to undergo a laryngoscopy and upper endoscopy. She was taken into the procedure room, and anesthesia began. No one could have imagined that what happened behind the doors of that clinic would become a medical tragedy that shocked America. During the procedure, Joan's blood oxygen levels began to drop severely. Instead of immediately stopping and providing emergency care, carelessness and fatal mistakes occurred. Her airway spasmed, and her brain was completely deprived of oxygen for a prolonged period. When the situation spiraled out of control, the woman's heart stopped beating right on the operating table. The doctors frantically called 911. Joan was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital in a deep coma completely dependent on a ventilator. The entertainment world held its breath in prayer, but no miracle came. After a week in the intensive care unit with irreversible brain damage, her daughter, Melissa Rivers, had to make the most painful decision of her life: remove her mother's breathing tube. On September 4th, 2014, Joan Rivers closed her eyes forever. The sudden death of the comedy legend immediately sparked a wave of outrage and large-scale investigations. The official medical examiner's report concluded that the cause of death was therapeutic complication leading to cerebral hypoxia. However, when details inside the clinic were exposed, the public was horrified to learn of the terrible mistakes made by the medical team. Investigations by the Department of Health revealed that Yorkville Endoscopy had committed a series of serious violations. They had allowed Joan's personal ear, nose, and throat doctor to perform a vocal cord biopsy without any written consent from the patient. Even worse, there were allegations that a doctor in the operating room casually took out a phone to take a selfie while Joan lay unconscious under anesthesia. When her heart rate and oxygen levels began dropping sharply, the medical team failed to recognize the danger in time. Emergency resuscitation and artificial respiration were delayed, causing Joan's condition to fall into an unsalvageable tragedy. Facing her mother's unjust death, Melissa Rivers filed a lawsuit against Yorkville Endoscopy and the doctors involved. In her lawsuit, Melissa not only sought compensation, but wanted the truth exposed about the negligence and irresponsibility that had taken her mother's life. After tense legal battles in 2016, the two sides reached a settlement with an undisclosed amount. The public's and fans' grief was immeasurable. A woman who had fiercely fought against her parents' opposition gender oppression, the boycott of her powerful mentor, and the pain of losing her husband, had to lose her life because of complications from a simple medical procedure. A mix of outrage and sorrow swept across America. The life of a legend had been stolen in a private clinic by the unprofessionalism of people wearing white coats. Although her departure was marked by injustice, when the coffin was lowered, what remained in people's minds was not only the tragedy of her final moments. Joan had left, but she had lived a life full to every breath. The legacy of her biting laughter, her courage in exposing the truth, and her fearless spirit remains deeply etched in the flow of popular culture. Before Joan's time, no one thought a woman could stand on stage and talk about taboo topics like sex, aging, abortion, or the misery of failed marriages. Joan used her career like a bulldozer, flattening the gender stereotypes that confined women to demure molds. The next generation of top comedy stars, like Ellen DeGeneres, Sarah Silverman, Amy Schumer, and Ali Wong, all acknowledged that they could freely hold the microphone and speak their minds, because decades earlier, Joan Rivers had taken the blows for them. She had endured insults and contemptuous looks to expand the boundaries of free speech for women. The story of Joan Rivers' life teaches us a profound and painful lesson. Laughter can be a wonderful healing medicine, but at the same time, it is also the perfect curtain to hide countless bitter tears. Audiences saw Joan mock herself and mock the world, but few saw the bleeding wounds of a wife who had to collect her husband's body in a hotel room, or the pain of a student betrayed so cruelly by her great mentor. Her humor was distilled from the deepest layers of tragedy. Joan Rivers' life is a reminder of the harshness of the entertainment industry, especially for a woman who dared to be different. From smoky little clubs to national television stages, she had overcome every rejection with an almost unbreakable will. When doors slammed shut in front of her, Joan did not wait for anyone to open them. She found her own way to move forward. Today, when people mention Joan Rivers, they remember not only a comedian with words sharp as knives, they remember a journey full of tears, wounds, and resilience. She turned rejection into art, turned pain into laughter, and proved that even when life treats you like a cruel joke, you still have the right to pick up the microphone and tell that story in your own way.